We want to be able to use jQuery and all this power, but from within Angular. Right? And the proper way to do that is through the use of directives. Right? So before we look at how to use jQuery inside of Angular, we need to look at directives. Right? So let's look at directives. So let's create here in lectures, we'll create a directory called directives. Okay? And let's create an HTML page here, index.html. And we'll load the libraries we need. We'll load Bootstrap first. So link, and this is href. We'll have to go up twice, and then down to vendor, and then Bootstrap. What else do we have here? Dist, CSS, then Bootstrap, there it is, and then style sheet. There we go. All right. Let's load now Angular. So script, and then we'll say source. We'll go up twice, then down to vendor, then Angular, and then Angular.js. There it is. All right. And let's call our application. Let's go to div here. We'll call it directives. Directives. All right. Let's see if we can navigate there. And we'll say lectures, directives, directives. So we're in there. Let's add a couple of styling here. This will be container fluid. There we go. Let's name this ng app. We'll call it not here, sorry. There we go. Directive app. Okay. And we'll create that application inside of a app.js, src app.js, okay, which we haven't created yet. We'll create it right here, app.js, app.js, there it is. And we create the director right here. So function, and this will be Angular, and we'll create a module with the name directive app with no dependencies. Everybody okay? All right. Let's load this, see if it complains. All right, so it doesn't complain. So we have our directives app that doesn't do anything. All right, so what do directives allow us to do? Well, directives allow us to take over the entire HTML. Right? If we don't like how HTML behaves, we can redefine the entire behavior of the HTML language. Right? If we don't like how H1 behaves, we can take over it. If we wish there was a new HTML element that's not there, we can create a brand new one. For instance, we can create a hello tag. It doesn't exist, right? It doesn't exist. But I wish there were one. Okay, it would just say hello, hello world, and we can just do that. We can create that. So let's do that. Let's see how we can do that. So right now it doesn't do anything, right? It's being ignored by the browser, and it should, right? The browser parses the hello tag and says, well, I don't know what that is, right? So it just ignores it, right? But if you remember, it's not only the browser who parses the HTML document, the DOM. Angular also parses the HTML, the DOM, the document. Yes, right. So Angular could take a look at that and says, ooh, I know what that is, right? I could do something with that. Right? I could associate behavior to this tag. Right? So let's do that. We can do that here in the app by using the directive decorator, right? That says I'm going to declare a brand new directive called hello, and this matches exactly the name of this element. I am saying that there is an element, there's a brand new element whose name is hello, right? And I'm going to associate a function to that, right? So hello, and I'll call it directive. So this and this don't have to match, right? Although I often do, just to keep it straight in my head. But here, I'm making a point not to make them the same, to emphasize that they don't have to be called the same. They can be, but they don't have to. And I'll show you why I am even making the point. Why I'm making the point that they don't have to be the same. So here's my hello directive, and the way this behaves is that when Angular parses the DOM and it finds well, it first declares this, and it has a map of all the directives that it knows about, right? So it will make a point that when it parses this DOM, right, if it sees this this element here, it'll say, I have something for you there, right? I can do something. It will instantiate this function. Actually, it will call this function, expecting the function to return something, right? Of telling it what to do with that new element. What do you want me to do with that element? Right now, we're not doing anything. We're going to do an alert. Hello directive. So if I refresh, notice that indeed it found that hello element, right? And it did what the function said, right? To do an alert. But that's not really what we want. What we want is to manipulate the DOM, do something to the DOM. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, there's a couple of ways. The simplest ways is to return an object. That's the simplest thing, is to return an object. And this object will have many different attributes, many different properties here that control the behavior of that element, of that brand new element. Okay? One of the simplest things is that to use the template attribute and tell it, what do I want to render? Meaning, put the following in that hello element you found. Right? So I want you to put hello world in there. Okay, you use the following HTML and put it in there. Right, so there it is. It's hello world, right? So that hello world was injected, right? If you look at the DOM, there is my hello. See that? Which was empty. Right? There was nothing in there. Right? There was nothing in there. I'm saying that inject into that this template, and this could be, a simple string, or it could be an entire HTML document. Right? It could be fairly complex HTML piece of code. Right? So it could be H2. Yes? Actually, in here, I could put an entire, ng repeat, ng model, a whole bunch of HTML, Angular related code in there, right? Right now, it's just this simple HTML. But this itself gets compiled as an HTML Angular template, right? With all the ng clicks and ng repeats and everything you could put in there. Not that you would, right? But I'm just pointing out that this is a full-blown HTML Angular expression. Yes? Right? If indeed you're going to do something as complex, something that contains lots and lots of stuff, you would instead refer to an outside document, a separate HTML document. Right? So you could, here you could put the name of an HTML document, hello world.html, right? That contains the content, right? You can grab and generate here, put in a new HTML document called hello world, and in here you can put h2 hello world. Yes? Right? And this would behave exactly the same way. Right? Everybody okay? Yep. But now because it's a separate HTML document, I am free to do all sorts of things here, right? I could put, ng repeats in here. I could put tables, fairly complex data in here, right? Ever still with me? All right. So let's do something like that. Let's create a controller. Let's create a control that can provide us with data, right? Provide us with data. So for instance, we might say controller, directive controller. Okay, implemented. I'll put it down here. That can, for instance, let's use scope. I'm lazy. And put some data in there. We could say message. Hello from controller. Yes? Now, obviously, you might expect that in your index page, obviously, right, if you declare the controller as the controller for this div, ng controller, and it's called, what's the name of that controller? Directive controller. You can certainly display the message here, right? Just message, right? Hello from controller, but that's nothing new, right? But not only is it available there, right? It's available in the entire scope of this div, right? The entire scope of that div, which includes that hello element, right? Okay, so that means that if hello is going to be rendered, and hello is rendered by including this hello world.html, that means that hello HTML, hello world HTML is in the scope of the controller. Right, so I should be able to just refer to the message even here inside of my little HTML. Make sense? Everybody okay? Right, so there it is. So hello from controller. So this hello world and this hello from controller is being rendered from that directive. You see that? It's being embedded in there. Okay. Now, what's cool about this is that all that behavior, all that HTML is just being very conveniently being hidden behind this innocuous HTML element. Right? You can put lots of behavior behind this one HTML element, and you can just reuse it anywhere you want, right? Without having to use ugly, ng includes, ng anything, right? You can just put it all behind something that looks very inconspicuous, right? It's just a simple HTML element, right? And you can create lots of these, right? That have all sorts of really good reusable behaviors that you can copy and paste anywhere you want that behavior. Make sense? Right. So let's take this a little further. Let's create yet another directive. Let's create a directive. A list. Item list. And this is item list directive. Okay? Now notice the name I chose here. See the name I chose? That's a proper name, right? It has two words in it, right? And I use camel casing, correct? And in JavaScript, that is the proper names of things, right? You camel case variables. Good naming convention is camel cased, all right? But in HTML, this is completely indistinguishable from this, right? Lowercase, which is completely indistinguishable from item list, right? As far as the browser is concerned, all these three are the same exact thing. Right? Camel case has no meaning in HTML. Yes? So these are two different naming conventions, two different technologies. There's the HTML, which is interpreted by the browser and rendered, right? And then you have JavaScript, each one with its own naming convention. So how do we marry these two naming conventions? So in HTML, the way you the naming convention in HTML is that if you have two words, you don't use camel casing. Instead, you use dashes. Right? You don't camel case, no capitals. Right? Dashes instead. So it would be improper to use this naming convention in HTML. But it's totally proper in JavaScript. It would be improper in JavaScript to use this naming convention. Yes? So how do you marry these two ways of naming these two things backwards and forwards? Yes? So what Angular does is the following. It tries to cut a deal between these two worlds. It says, all right, HTML, when you're in HTML, you're going to use this naming convention. But when you map that into JavaScript and the names of the directives, you're going to use the equivalent camel-cased version of the same name. That means that dashes and the first letter are converted into capital. That makes sense? So this is actually mapped to this. All right? That's why I was making a point that this doesn't have to have the same name as this. Okay? So that list, right, if we implement it, and we return, we say template, this is the list item directive. Right, so if I refresh, notice it says, this is the list item directive. So it's that one list item that we declared there. Everybody okay? All right. All right, so let's do something with that directive. Let's have the controller provide scope widgets, an array of widgets. Since we are working on widgets, okay, we might have a list of widgets here, right? Where you might have maybe the type of the widget, where some widgets might be headings, some widgets might be images, and some widgets might be YouTube, and some widgets might be HTML. Yes, all right. All right. So in the items list, again here this is a proper Angular HTML. I can just refer to objects that were declared on my parent scope, right? And the controller, the directive controller, is declaring on the scope of widgets. Yeah. So I should be able to just put that in there. And I have the JSON. See that? I have the JSON right there, right? Available in my HTML. Right, so what's it doing here is that it's compiling this HTML. It's looking for this in the parent scope, which is given by the controller, and it says, it's an array of objects. I'm going to replace that with a JSON value. Yes? Right? But that's not really what we want. What we're going to do here is we're going to load a widget list.html. Okay? And I think it's widget list. And we're going to implement that in a separate HTML here. Okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to try and render that here as well. So let's load that. It didn't work. Oops, what did I do? What did I break? Oh, widgets maybe? There it is. I got the widgets, yes? right? Let's load it. Let's render it as a UL and a line item. Yes, and in that line item, we're going to ng repeat of widget in widgets, and we're going to render each widget separately. Widget. There it is, right? With type, headings, images, YouTube, HTML, and obviously all of these could be ng includes, right? Well, they could be ng includes, or they could be themselves. They could be again directives, right? So each one of your widgets, right? A better, proper way to implement them would be to wrap them inside of directives, right? Instead of using the ng include. Right, and we can play with that a little later. All right, so I have my heading here and the images and whatnot, and they're being rendered. So what I like to be able to do is to sort this. Right, I like to be able to sort this using jQuery UI. I like to use jQuery to be able to sort this. So how do I do that? Right, so to do that, I need to somehow, from within here, right, to be able to apply a jQuery UI Sortable. Right, so let's try and do that. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to add another attribute here that we can configure. I wanted to, once this has been compiled, once this has been rendered, right, now that it's in the DOM, I would like for it to call me in a function and tell me, hey, I'm done. It's now in the DOM. Now go ahead, go at it. Do whatever you want with it. Okay. And to do that, we use the attribute link. Link allows us to define a function, a link function, okay, that will be invoked after this HTML has been compiled, has been rendered, it is now part of the DOM, right? And now we can go in there and do something, right? What could we do? Well, the link function takes a couple of arguments. Right? Takes 3 arguments, actually 4 arguments. The first one is the scope. Scope, that, like the name suggests, right, is any data, right, that is associated with the current parent. Right? If there are any data that has been declared, it would be available through the scope. Okay? The other thing that it passes, the second argument that it passes, is the element. The element is a jQuery element, meaning jQuery was used to create that object. So it has functions such as append, right? It has remove, it has add class. All those cool functions we looked at earlier would be available here, right? But not all of them. It only has a reduced set of functions. It has a minimum set of functions, right? It uses a very small subset of jQuery. If we want the full-blown jQuery library, we need to do a couple more things. Right? But for now, let's do a console log element just to see what it is. Right? So let's render and let's go to the console. Notice what it comes back with. It comes back with this says the element. Right? Notice if I hover, notice the browser is highlighting it. Right? It's highlighting. If I look at the elements, there's my item list. See that I'm highlighting it, and it highlights on the right, on the left-hand side, right, with the UL in there. There it is. There's the UL, and there's my all the line items are there. See LI, they're all there, right? In the console, they're there too, right? All the elements are there. All the child elements is the UL. The UL has a whole bunch of LI elements. The first element is the LI element. If I highlight it, there it is. So it gives me an object representation of what's there, right? That was created by jQuery. Right? We don't have to deal with all of this. We would only need to be able to grab the first UL. The first UL, the first child. There it is, that UL. If we grab that UL, and we call sortable on it, guess what? It's going to be sortable. Right? We're just going to be able to grab it using jQuery UI and make it sortable. Okay? But we don't have sortable. We need to load jQuery UI for that. Yes? And to load jQuery UI, we're going to have to load jQuery first. Right? So let's do that. So let's go back to the HTML, the index, and we're going to load jQuery now. Oops. Now, where do we put it? Well, we want to put it right before loading Angular. Right before we load Angular. Because Angular, what it does is that if it doesn't find any libraries, any jQuery libraries, it will know to use its own, right, minified version of its own little jQuery version. Yes? But if it finds jQuery that has already been declared, then instead it will use that version of jQuery that we load. Right? So let's do that. So we're going to do a script source. We're going to load vendor. We load jQuery and jQuery JS. There it is. So we loaded that. So now Angular is going to stop using its own version of jQuery. Instead, it's going to use our version of jQuery. It's going to behave exactly the same way because its jQuery is a subset of this larger core jQuery, right? So it's going to behave exactly the same way. But it's going to allow us, right, to use the more powerful jQuery UI JS library. You see that? Now we have both jQuery libraries loaded, the core and the UI, and now we have Angular as well. Everybody okay? All right. All right. So from within our code, our app.js, right? What we could do is we could go fetch that UL. It says, hey, elements. From within element, we would like to go fetch our child UL elements, right? That is somewhere beneath us, right? So this element you see is what? It's this right here, right? It's the parent to this UL, right? It's this index right here. It's this item list right there, right? Which inside the first element child to this is that UL. Okay, so let's go fetch it. So one way we could do it is find, and we could tell it what element are we looking for underneath us. Okay, and we have the UL now. But we're not really going to need it. We can just, well, we can. We can just say UL. Now that we found the UL, we can say draggable. Right? And so that if I render this, this whole thing is draggable. What? That's not what I want. Oh no, I don't want draggable. I'm sorry. We want what? Sortable. Thank you. Sortable. There we go. We can sort the widgets, move them up and down any which way we want. Make sense? Right? So this is what you're going to do in your assignment is you're going to apply something similar to this, right? And apply using the link function and make it sortable. Make sense? All right. Now, typically, these directives, usually these directives, you might be creating very powerful, very interesting directives that maybe somebody else wants to use. Maybe it's a directive that you can configure the name of a database and a table and username and password, right? It connects to a database, right? Using Ajax, and then it comes back and it renders a table of all this and allows you to drag and drop and things like that. Yes. and maybe you want to make money out of it, and you want to encapsulate it and sell it, right? So typically, these directives you might want to encapsulate it in a module. Notice that these directives are only existing in our module. Yes, in our module. So really, we couldn't this module has all sorts of things. It's got lots of controllers, all sorts of services, directives, right? So typically, we might want to be able to break it up into many different little modules, so that maybe we can break it off and sell our directives module. So let's break up these directives into a separate module. Okay, so for instance, what we're going to do is we can grab our app.js, right? And I'm going to copy and paste it, and I'm going to call it directives, right? And so now app.js and directives look exactly the same, yes? But what I'm going to do is that I'm going to have this be its own little module with no controllers. It's only going to define the directives, and I'm going to call it my directives. So this is a brand new module. Okay, nobody's referring to this module. It's not its own application, right? It's its own little module. Nobody's using it. Nobody's referring to it. Yes. Okay. I'm also going to remove the controller from here, because there is no controller. I only have my two directives. Yes. Now in the app.js, back in the app.js, we're going to have just the module and the controller, but no directives. Right. So let's remove the directives from here. We just have the controller. Yes. Right. So what we'd like to be able to do is that this directives app is being referred to by the index page. Yes, the index page. Right here, directives app, and here's my app.js. If I refresh, notice that nothing works, right? Because it found these item lists and this hello, and there are no directives defining these custom HTML. Right? There are no directives designing that. Okay, but that's okay because we declared it in a separate file called directives. Right? Which is indeed declaring my directives in its own module. It's declaring two directives in this module. We would like the app.js to declare my directives as a dependency, meaning first load all my dependencies, right? Whatever it declares, right? Whatever it declares is now going to be part of my declarations, right? Whatever it declares is as if I would have declared it. Okay, what does it declare? Two directives. So now those two directives are going to be available in this app, right? So now everything works again, right? So this is a very common way that large applications, right, are broken up into smaller modules, right? Where you define all your directives in one module, right? All your services perhaps in another module, right? As applications grow, right, we need to find ways to manage the madness, right? And so this is one way that we can have a whole team working on directives, another team working on the services, other teams working on different parts of the application. Make sense? And now these directives, because they're in their own modules, you can have the same directives being used by many different products. You could have many products. Your company might have many different projects going around, right? All using a common family of directives, right? That are reusable components that can be can provide very useful behaviors across the entire enterprise. Make sense? All right. I think that will be enough for you to be able to complete the assignment.